Alright, I've been dreading this damn video all week, for various reasons, and now I get to do it on practically no sleep, so forgive me if there's any, careless mistakes, but we should be good. There's gonna be 6 movies that we talk about. It would have been 7, but the streaming release for The Aeronauts was pretty last minute today, so I figure I'll just push it to the post-Christmas video with Uncut Gems and Little Women, so it'll be there. So we'll talk about these 6, which are in theaters and streaming, and some have been out for a while, and it's a whole thing. But let's start with the obvious big one with Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, supposedly the last chapter in the initial franchise. And as I was saying a couple years ago with The Last Jedi, and a couple years before that with The Force Awakens, I've just kind of always been into the Star Wars thing. I was pretty much raised on it, starting with the re-release of the original trilogy back in '97, and it just went from there. When I saw Return of the Jedi, that's pretty much the reason I love movies. That's like where it started, was when I saw Return of the Jedi. So, and I've pretty much been just willing to take it in for whatever it is, and I hardly come away too pissed off. So, like, The Force Awakens was one of my top 5 movies of 2015, and despite the fact that there's a lot wrong with The Last Jedi, I still like it a good deal, honestly. So, I was really into this for a while, and then the reviews started coming out, and I didn't see any specific review. I just heard a general consensus was that's about it. And after the really, really mixed reaction The Last Jedi got, I really didn't even take that into consideration. I mean, it worried me, like, a little bit, but it's because it wasn't like an extreme reaction or anything, but it was... I went in a little prepared to be, I guess, underwhelmed, especially being the supposed closing chapter of this gigantic thing. And yeah, so when it starts, I still get, really excited about the same stuff, the title and the crawl and all that, and all of it is still... There's still no feeling like seeing the crawl for a new Star Wars movie. There's no excitement like that. And then it's telling us, obviously, what's happening, and I don't know... Like, I don't know whether or not to mark this video with spoilers or not, because I have no idea what people know going in. Because I didn't really know jack shit. I kind of stayed away from it on purpose, like, pretty much everything. So I'll just mark it, like, some spoilers, and we'll just talk about, like, I won't go into, like, everything that happens at the end or anything, but the setup has some stuff that I don't know if people know about or not. And that's honestly one of my first problems with it, which is the idea of bringing the Emperor back. And when I heard that they were doing that, because I heard some of the trailers, obviously, which was unavoidable, that famous one that ends with the Emperor's laugh. So, I knew he was coming back in some way. In the posters, you can tell they're, like, showing him off. And I had assumed it was going to be, like an evil version of a Force ghost, or something to that extent, or something in the sort of supernatural extent, which could be anything in this world. But no, with no lead-in from the other movies, at least that I can remember, he's back. He's here, like, physically. He's just here. He says something like, "Yes, I died once," or something. But I don't know. He's here now. But not only that, it became clear very quickly, for a number of reasons, that the James Bond fans out there surely will know what I'm talking about when I say that The Rise of Skywalker is basically the Spectre of the Star Wars franchise, where there's a few reveals here that are a bit overkill and try to say something about the whole franchise, but they're clearly not that thought out. And it turns out that the main head villain has been the architect of this whole... of the things we've been seeing lately, despite the fact that there have been no clues to his continued existence in the last couple of movies, with us believing him to be dead. And they hit you. And they hit you with the reason I'm not entirely sure about some of this stuff is that they throw so much shit at us in like the first 5 or 10 minutes. I really wasn't sure that I was catching everything. Like I looked it up before I started this just to make sure I didn't miss a major thing about how the Emperor is back. Because it seemed so bizarre that they just told us to run. They basically just presented him and then told us to run with it. So, and that's obviously, like I say, Return of the Jedi is such a big influence on how I love movies in general. And like, because it's got one of the best endings ever. Which a major scene in that is the Emperor's fucking death, and it's this whole great conclusion to that whole thing. And I wasn't even necessarily bothered by the fact that they, did a 7 and then an 8, obviously, despite the fact that I thought that was such a perfect ending, was because I love Kylo Ren as a villain so much. I know some people, see him as, like, angsty and whiny and all that, which is true to an extent. But the way Adam Driver plays him, and his lightsaber, and his look, I just think he's an awesome... And that first scene in The Force Awakens, he is so intimidating. It's amazing. And the fact that The Force Awakens waited so long for him to take his helmet off, just really made him this awesome force, for lack of a better word, that sort of felt in the vein of Vader, but without being too much like it. I know there's the whole thing about people thinking The Force Awakens is a carbon copy of A New Hope, which I've always thought is a bit of a reach, but I do get the certain points that you can point out. And we bring in the whole Snoke thing, and I know it pissed a lot of people off with The Last Jedi because so many people wanted Snoke to be a big deal, with like a big old origin and like whatever the hell else they wanted. And Kylo Ren just killed him like that. And I thought that was amazing because I loved going into this movie thinking about the fact that Kylo Ren now answers to nobody. And with just as intimidating as he is and as big as he goes, that was really exciting to me. And the fact that they even call him the Supreme Leader in the crawl, I was just like, I am so fucking ready for this. Even his first scene, he's just mowing down people left and right by himself. That's his opening scene in this movie. And the Emperor's back now, so... That whole idea just cuts off so much of the exciting things going into this. So I didn't know how to feel about that, to put it mildly, when it was introduced that way, especially as early as it was in the movie. There's like no build-up to it. Like, forget that there's no build-up to him in the other two movies. There's no build-up to him in the movie itself. It's one of the first things that happens is just saying, hey, he's back, and here he is in his physical form. And yeah, and then we get into stuff that's going to inevitably lead to more Star Wars-type twists. The tradition that there's at least, 1 or 2 big reveals about a character's backstory or whatever. And needless to say, the ones in this aren't near as effective or... I would say, like, revelatory, but it's like... I don't want to say too much, but it's... I just feel like there's a lot that doesn't make sense when you really think about it. And it's like, I feel like a lot of the ideas for this movie and you look at this, it is like the final movie in not just a trilogy, like its own, trilogy in itself, but the whole damn franchise. Like, we start in the middle and then we go back, and if you're going to go forward, that means you're giving it a brand new final ending. So what you're going to do with that is going to be a big fucking deal. And I feel like the ideas for this movie were written down on a fucking napkin. Like they were just scrawled at the last minute right after a screening of The Last Jedi. So it's like, well, I guess we can just do this thing. But then, of course, it feels a lot like it feels less like this movie was made to be a big, emotional closing thing, and more like it was made like out of a mandatory sort of thing, where it's like J.J. Abrams almost just felt trapped in this, like, oh well, I started this trilogy and they're giving me the job back, so I guess I need to finish it. Anybody? Anybody? Let's go on message boards and see what people are saying, and let's just make fucking fan fiction come to life. Because it does feel like, and I know this is like what a lot of people weirdly wanted, was it did feel a lot like there were cases where they actually went out and said, oh, this is stuff that really pissed people off about The Last Jedi. Let's just try to take it back as much as we can. Let's try to make The Last Jedi as irrelevant as possible. And I'm sure that's met with cheers with a certain body of people, but somebody I saw, there was one comment that I saw before I went in that stuck out to me, and that was, they were saying that it felt like if Abrams had made all three movies, this is him trying to make his second and third movie all at once in this one. And I can totally see that being the case. Especially with, like I was saying, how much that seems like they're throwing at us all at once at the beginning. And a lot of the stuff, like, even though, I really like the other two movies in this, the sequel trilogy, it does obviously have a lot of the, I guess you could say the Avengers-esque, like, attempts at banter, which have always been there. Obviously, these movies have always been, blockbusters. The original was, like, right in there with, like, it was only 2 years after Jaws when blockbusters really started becoming a thing. But it's really heavy on the trying to be comedic at almost every turn thing, even when it's totally not the case. It's like they're doing that. They've done that since the beginning so much with Poe. As much as I love, Oscar Isaac and the idea of Poe as a character, there are scenes of his that I can't fucking stand. And they're usually the opening scenes. There was the opening scene when Kylo Ren gets his awesome, badass introduction, and you've got Poe saying, like, hey man, I can't hear you through the mask. And then you've got the opening of The Last Jedi when he's fucking around with Hux. And it's like, I don't mind a character like that, but the fact that you keep opening the movies with this shit is, like, really fucking with your tone. I loved it. It felt so cathartic when there was the scene when Kylo Ren put his mask back together and he walks in, he's got, like, fucking Chucky scars on it. And he's like, are you distracted by my appearance? And they're doing the fucking comedic thing. They're like, oh, are you talking about the mask? Because it looks great. Yeah, it looks awesome. And he cuts this off by just using the Force to just fling the guy into the fucking ceiling. And it's like, yes, maintain your intimidation tactics when people are trying to be fucking comedic around you. That's how you do it. And I just can't, because you look at it when it does work, and you can see the difference in creativity. Where it's like the banter between Han and Leia in Empire. They're obviously trying to recreate here with Poe and Rey towards the beginning, when they're just bickering back and forth. But it's like where we get, with that kind of stuff, like, yeah, it's just characters bickering, but in Empire we can walk away with lines like, scruffy-looking nerve herder. And you're not going to find anything that creative in this. It's just literally just back and forth bitching at each other. And that's all it is. There's no particular standout lines or anything like that. It's just generic complaining about each other to each other. Which is not going to have the same effect at all. So there's that. It's still, between this and like Batman vs. Superman, it's like, it's becoming more and more insane that Chris Terrio is an Oscar-winning screenwriter. It's like, maybe it's just the material he's saddled with, and there's the studio working and all that, and other writers and all that, but he's really got to try to build a reputation back up outside of blockbusters, I think. And there's also the whole thing going on with Poe in regards to that new Kerry Russell character, where you just get that sense where I was talking about the generic banter that's just meaningless and doesn't leave you with anything memorable. is going to continue because they're doing that age-old trope that we recognize. Probably a recent example you go back to would be the first Pirates movie when Depp says, "Oh, hey, I know these people. I can communicate with them, and we'll be okay. We'll get information." And then he just gets slapped, and we realize there's kind of turmoil in their past. Well, we know exactly that we're gonna get humor exactly like that and dialogue exactly like that on top of what we've already gotten. When Poe is like, "Oh no, we can't go to that place. I had bad luck there," and you just hear that line and you immediately know what that means. It means fucking tension with Kerry Russell and same meaningless banter bullshit. I would just like to stop and say really quick that I don't hate this movie at all. Like, I find it hard to believe. I find it hard to imagine me hating a Star Wars movie. Like, really, really hating one. But and this is one of those cases where, like, I came out of this really trying to like it. Where, like, I was like, well, I'll wait until I do this, and then I'll be able to really know how I feel about it. Because it was like, everything I'm saying right now was kind of suppressed when I came out. And so it's coming out now, and yeah, but I don't feel like I hate it. There's just a lot of things about it that just feel lazy. And not just that, but also, like, they were, for some reason, I don't know why they are so fixated, because, once again, let's go back to Empire. Because the thing that really made Empire so famous was how it ended. Where it's like, hey, Luke, guess what? I'm your father, which means everything you fucking know is a lie. And we see Luke break down, and he's lost his hand, and the Empire basically fucking wins at the end of that movie. Which is why Return of the Jedi was necessary. And here, there's, like, no particular... Then it's that same shit. And I was talking about, this is a problem I had with The Last Jedi. The fucking flip-flopping all the time. Where it's, oh, you think it's this thing, oh, but it's actually this thing, but no, it's the thing you thought it was before. So what's the damn point? And he did that so much. And in this one, it's one of those cases of, if it looks... It does it to the point to where it doesn't do the go back thing now. It's just doing the, oh, you thought it was this thing, but it's actually this thing. But the actually this thing is always a very safe thing. So every time it looks like something drastic happens or something really bad happens, eventually you grow immune to that and you're like, oh, it's going to be fine. And it always is. And then when it's not, they do it in, like, the most unceremonious way possible. And so you just don't know... And so you're just immune to feeling anything. Like, you just feel nothing now, even when something dramatic does happen, because it's just, like, I guess it's fucked you over too much. And then... So that. And then, I guess this is a minor spoiler, but... The whole reason I'm bringing it up is how damn obvious it is. The whole thing, the whole really pointless thing about what happened to Poe in The Force Awakens, or what didn't happen to Poe, I guess, is that we immediately meet him, he and Finn, escape, and then they crash, and then we're supposedly under the impression that Poe has died at the beginning of The Force Awakens, despite Oscar Isaac being all over the promotional material, and so clearly he's not dead. It's about as obvious as Gordon's not dead in The Dark Knight. And Chewie gets that treatment now. And it's the same shit. It is the exact same shit. Only they weigh even less. It appears that Chewie has died in an explosion, and we find out he's alive like 5 minutes later. After they've made it this big emotional thing. And hardly an emotional thing. If that had been Chewie's death, Chewie would have basically died in the background of a scene. He would have been Vin Diesel in Saving Private Ryan. And... Okay. So, and that's... Yeah, and there is, speaking of Chewie, and the scenes pertaining to Chewie, there is a lot of fan service in this movie. But that's kind of a blurry line depending on the person, because sometimes fan service can be amazing. Like, the entirety of Endgame is amazing. But then there's other times when it's, cringy and ridiculous and forced and pointless and pandering. Like callback lines and, like, the recent Terminator movies and shit like that. And this movie is about half and half. This is what I was also saying, where this is kind of it kind of felt like Spectre, where some of it's really amazing, particularly callbacks, and then a lot of it's also not. And the presence of Billy D. Williams here is the good kind of fan service. It's like really thrilling to see her, because especially when you see him in like real life, and he's like during the press he's like not particularly chatty and he walks with a cane. But in the movie, you would never know, because he's like he feels almost just as lively as he did in Empire and Jedi, and it's really incredible and really satisfying to see. He's not there a shitload, but he's there enough to where if he had been there more, it may have started to turn into overkill fan service. But he's there just enough that it works and you get that nice feeling about it. So there's also people that they've added to the cast. Some people that it's nice to see here, but it's also kind of like they get more to do than they probably should, being a character we just met in this movie. Specifically Richard E. Grant. Richard E. Grant, who basically gets to be the new Grand Moff Tarkin of the movie, which is just that idea in general of him playing that type of character in this movie is amazing, and I loved any screen time that he got. The only trouble is Hux still exists, and Hux is also a Grand Moff Tarkin type, so we're doubling up now, and without saying too much, they just decide to fuck Hux over, basically. Hux gets way, way fucked over in regards to just this movie in general. So there's that. And so all of this on top of there's so much they could do and so much they could have expanded on in 2 hours and 35 minutes, but it's hard to tell how much time they would have had extra if we cut out all the fake out shit. Like for that 10 minutes where we're supposed to think Chewie's dead, that's completely unnecessary. That time could have been totally used for other reasons and shown off other things, given, more, expanded on ideas a little more. Just 10 minutes could have done a lot with whatever you chose to do here. With all the stuff that's laying here, that's just gonna get, 5 seconds of screen time, and, oh, by the way, live with it, we're moving on. There's just a lot of that. And there's gonna be a lot of contrivances. Like, more so than usual. And once again, it's the kind of movie where sometimes you just have to run with contrivances, because it's a fantasy movie. But then you get stuff like, there is a dagger in this movie that basically acts as that thing in the Goonies, where Mikey was able to line up where the shit was and know where the treasure was. Yeah, Rey has one of those now. Rey has something that gets her to a crucial point that's also something the Goonies had. A group of fucking 12-year-olds and Josh Brolin. So sometimes there's stuff like that where they're just so in a big damn hurry to get us to the point. And then there's just lazy stuff like, here's like a major thing that happens, and it, completely changes a character for the rest of the movie. And then it's like, oh, wow, this is interesting, and how they're going to deal with this. Sometimes it's used for, comedic purposes. Sometimes it's seriously, sort of almost existential about itself. And then later in the movie, it's like, oh, we can fix that. Problem solved. In 10 seconds. So there's a lot of that, too. So I don't know. And then obviously there is inevitable, character turns and all that. Basically hitting, it goes back to the criticism of what The Force Awakens was doing with A New Hope. Just hitting the same beats as other movies. And if you've watched Jedi recently, you should be set. Especially since they... okay, so give The Force Awakens credit. Hux is not actually Grand Moff Tarkin. Kylo Ren is not actually Darth Vader. But The Rise of Skywalker felt the need to just actually bring the Emperor back. That's how just, you know what? Fuck it, they were. It's like, our creative juices have gone as far as they can go. So we're just gonna do that. And then it's like, when everybody was like, it seems like they're constantly trying to fix things that were in The Last Jedi. And it's like everybody was so underwhelmed about what happened to Luke. To where it's like, oh, Luke's here and he's the big hero, and oh no, they just blew him away like that. And it's like, oh shit, how did he survive that? Oh my god, this Luke is like the ultimate, fucking Jedi hero. And it's like, oh, he's not even there. He's just a projection. Actually, that's kind of cool. Did he just fucking die? And did he just fucking fade away like nothing? Like it was that anticlimactic? Get used to that. Get real fucking used to that. So, yeah. And there is still some impressive stuff that they've done here. That I know I focus like on all the negative stuff. I'm realizing now in the moment that's a lot of negative stuff. Like that's most of the movie. So now I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to praise about it. Because there are things here. In the middle of the movie, Rey and Kylo Ren have an amazing fight. So there's that. And that's followed up with a scene where there was a scene that, just knowing the other movies, that I knew was eventually going to happen, and I was dreading was going to happen. This involves my love of Kylo Ren as a big, intimidating villain, but we all knew this moment was eventually going to come, but the way it transitions, it's like, because there's the battle with Rey, and then we're eventually going to reach a turning point, but the way they handle, like, the reason and the execution of that turning point is, like, that's the best way they could have done that. And it was something I was genuinely surprised to see. So props for that, I guess. It was like the moment I've been dreading this entire trilogy, and it's like, well, so much for big, intimidating villain and all that. But yeah, they actually really did something nice and big and emotional with that moment that works. And it was everything that came after that, like the next hour after that, that was like, oh shit. So, is that about I think that's about what's going on here. Another thing I was going to say was the presence of Carrie Fisher. I do think, not only is it a nice ode to her to have the character here for as much as she is, and it's like, I'm not quite sure if it's like, like sometimes I'm assuming it's Peter Cushing stuff. I think I heard like one or two are like, unused footage from The Last Jedi or something. And I think I can point out exactly what those scenes are, where you can tell like not a lot of work had to be done to the scene. And there are obviously moments where like she's hugging Rey and her face isn't facing the camera, and it definitely feels like a dubbed in line. So you can tell stuff like that, but I think they still handled it well enough. I'm one of the apparently few people that thinks the Peter Cushing stuff in Rogue One is amazing. But I guess that's just me. But then there's also the fact that Carrie Fisher's first credited in the credits, which I thought is that's a really cool way to kind of show like the respect and all that. So yeah. So yeah, where's the damn praise? Because I don't hate this movie. But yeah, it's the stuff. John Williams is obviously still doing amazing work. There's obviously a lot of very familiar music cues, but he's always bringing new stuff to this also. Like he's gotten Oscar nominations for the past couple, and he's on the short list for this one. I'll be predicting him when we do that video, and then the effects are obviously always great. The action scenes, for the most part, like the later action scenes are much more well done, and like I said, they're kind of chop heavy in the first part or so, but yeah. So yeah, there's still plenty here to like, especially if you just like the characters in general, and the actors are still like, there are some really genuine emotional beats throughout, especially when you can tell we're getting close to the end, and it's like, you kind of get a sense that when the three of them, Daisy Ridley, Oscar Isaac, and John Boyega, are like together, there's like a real outside the character's emotion seeping into this. It's like a whole sort of, this is the end of the whole thing kind of thing. So yeah. So there's stuff in there, but yes, it is predictably occurring to me in the moment that it's. I was trying to be kind to it when I came out, but now that I've gone through everything, I don't know. So I think that's going to be about it on that. So let's go on to Cats. Cats, the movie that got an instantaneous reputation. Pretty much as soon, not even as soon as the movie was seen, as soon as that first trailer was out, I remember the gigantic negative reaction. To the point that I could have sworn they were going to pull a Sonic and push the date and like really, really fix the shit out of it or go back and redo something. But it does not appear that they did that, as far as I know. Because what I saw in the movie is about what I had remembered hearing about the problems that people had with the trailers. About the way they're doing like the CGI stuff. There's like no particular costumes or makeup here. It's like all CGI, and it's like they're trying to put the actors' faces on the on the cat-like bodies without doing anything particularly feline with their faces. So it's like human faces on cat bodies. And I swear there was a moment. There's one shot of Rebel Wilson where her face is like it's like off of her head. it's fucking weird. And so that's really what I came away from this movie thinking was people were going like, oh my god, this is like the most gloriously bad thing ever. Like all the reviews are making news. Like they are pointing out particular like excerpts from reviews and saying like this is like going to be one of the most historically bad movies ever. But I have talked before about how sometimes that can be really annoying because it seems like there's a movie every other fucking week that people want to turn into that. That's usually way blown out of proportion. And while this movie is a bad movie, it's a poorly executed movie, it's a boring movie, it's a bad idea to begin with. I feel like the fact that it's a bad idea to make Cats into a movie has been a joke for a long time. Uh, so, like a joke in Hollywood for a long time. Like, it would be the worst idea in the world. It's like one of the least adaptable things for the screen ever. um, I, I didn't necessarily walk away from the movie going, oh my god, that was terrible. Oh my god, I wish I could get that, 2 hours of my life back. All I could really keep saying when I came out of it was, it's just so weird. It's just, like, I don't know. I don't even know what else I can really say. It's just weird. It's weird that it exists. It's weird what it looks like. Just the, just the whole thing. The people behind it, the people in it. The cast list is so bizarre and all over the place. I remember watching the cast list build as they were casting. It's like, I think Idris Elba was one of the first people mentioned. It's like, alright. He hasn't had, despite the amazing reputation he has as an actor, his movie career has not exactly been explosive. But alright, we'll see what happens. And then Jennifer Hudson, and it's like, okay, she's mainly for music, but she's in a musical. She won an Oscar for acting in a musical. It makes sense. Especially playing Grisabella. She's going to have the big moment. Alright. And then, like, Taylor Swift and James Corden and a bunch of people whose names I know, but because I'm not exactly knowledgeable about current music, I'm not familiar with otherwise, apart from I've heard their names before. Yeah, that's most of the cast, and Rebel Wilson. It's the whole thing. It's a fucking weird-ass occurrence in movie history. And as far as, like, the show goes and my familiarity with it, I talked about this when we talked about West Side Story, where in music class in elementary school we were introduced to like a different Broadway production every year, and I think in 5th grade it was Cats. So we watched that the special where they filmed a performance and released it on video and all that, and that's the most familiarity I have with the show. And I remember it just kind of coming, like, I got how, like, you look at it and you can see, as weird as it is, like, when the movie, like, when the trailer was coming out and the movie was coming out and the reviews were coming out, it was kind of it started to become a thing where it was like everybody was going, how is this ever a good idea? How is this ever going to work as a movie? And there were a lot of people that were saying, despite the fact that it's like the most successful show ever, it's weird that it's even a show. Like it's the whole existence is weird. And I remember watching that recorded version of it, and it was like I remember being kind of. I mean, I could get why it's considered such a spectacle, but I also remember being kind of creeped out by it. I don't know if it was like the way they address the audience, and like there's that number at the beginning when they like all pile on top of each other and just look into the camera. The whole thing is kind of off-putting if it's not something that you just inherently take to, which obviously, you know, being the most like successful show ever, it's going to have its fan base no matter what. It's probably even going to give this movie a particular fan base of sorts. I know a lot of people think it's like destined for a cult following, but which is probably true. But that's yeah. So really the only thing I was doing, rather than taking in like what makes, you know, anything particularly good about it or what makes anything particularly bad about it, I just had so many other questions. Like, just watching them and seeing how weird they looked and how the CGI wasn't working and why not just use costumes and makeup. Because I feel like, the whole thing is like, yeah, it's an ongoing joke forever that you can't really adapt cats to the screen. It would just be a crazy idea. It would never work. But I don't know, and not necessarily even just based on how successful the show is. I feel like, even based on all this, there is somewhere an alternate universe where this movie is huge. But it would have, like, you know, real costumes and makeup and stuff like that. I feel like there is I feel like there's one possibility, going back to the endgame thing, where it's like, if you have 14 million scenarios, there will be at least one where this movie is just an absolute fucking smash. But number one, making it this movie, and number two, releasing it with Star Wars, that was just never going to happen to this movie, ever. So, I was trying to figure out, looking at the CGI and the faces and all that, the reaction the trailer got, and the fact that they decided to just not even try to change it after that reaction, was there a point in this movie and making it where somewhere like everybody eventually came to the conclusion, well, we're stuck with this, and it's like something went horribly wrong, and we're just gonna have to release this like it is and put up with it. And see. And it's like, I feel so bad, like James Corden and Taylor Swift and all of them are still out there trying to promote it while these reactions are coming out. And it's just a whole brutal thing going on. And Idris Elba, when he did his Hot Ones interview, the interview where they eat the hot wings and all that, was explaining that, and this was before he'd gotten the negative reactions, he was saying that the thing that really pulled him in and made him want to do it was not necessarily just the success of the show, but that they had shown him like drawings and they had given him the general idea just verbally of what they would look like after all the effects. And apparently it was extremely convincing, and they made it sound like it was going to be a really cool idea and like really inventive, and like something we'd never seen before. Well, it's definitely something I don't think we've ever seen before outside of those really weird, cheap animated movies, like Food Fight. This is basically like this might as well be live action Food Fight. So there's that, if you can even call it live action. But I don't know. So, and they do, one of the things I wondered if they were going to do or not, making it a screen adaptation, was, if I remember correctly, the show has no in-between dialogue. It's all numbers, all the way through. Whether it's just dancing, whether it's just singing, or whether it's both, there's no, like, just dialogue. And the movie, for the most part, sticks to that. Like, there's, like, maybe a few lines of dialogue between a song every now and then. Which, honestly, I feel like you kind of gotta go one way or the other. Either commit to just adding, like, writing your own dialogue, or commit to the have no dialogue. Just let the songs speak and the dancing speak. Um, so just throwing in like little bits here and there just made it even weirder. It's like just pick one. I don't know how much either is going to help you at this point, but at least try to pick one. And I could sense changes they have made. Like I said, my memory of the show is quite vague, but if I remember correctly, Macavity is a character that for the most part is built up. Like there's a like he keeps getting hinted at, and they're kind of saying like what he is and who he is and what he does. But we build up and build up and build up until he's finally revealed. I think that's how I remember the show being. And we see Idris Elba's face in this movie like 2 minutes in. He's just hanging out. And he like jumps down and like antagonizes people every now and then. So any effect that was going to do is gone. Just right away. And I get it, you know, if you got Idris Elba in your movie, you want to stick him in there as much as you can, especially with what would otherwise be a showy role in another movie or even universe. It would still... I could see why they'd want to, you know, add him in, but it's still just seeing him kind of hop down like every couple of songs or so kind of takes away that sort of mystic quality that he's apparently supposed to have. And then it gets into some of the more elaborate numbers, where I don't know if like even more limited settings like you would see on a stage would have helped this or not, but it just depends on the execution they were going to go with, because there is the Rebel Wilson number is like one of the first numbers, right? The Jenny Any Dots thing, and this number gets so increasingly bizarre as it goes. And not necessarily in a good or appealing way, where it starts off and they're introducing her and she's like rolling around in really weirdly suggestive ways, especially for this movie's only PG. But they really like laying down and spreading their legs for some reason. And eventually, into the song, she's like, we've got these little mice people that are really kind of freaky looking that probably aren't supposed to be. Then there's like a row of like cockroach people. I have no idea what they were. And then she's got her normal fur, her CGI fur, her cat look, and at some point she unzips it like you would, like almost like a burlesque thing, but it's like, yeah, she's wearing something, but there's still fur, so it's like layers of fur and a zipper. I don't know. I don't know. And like, it just gets increasingly bizarre as it goes on. But then she's still here to just do her Rebel Wilson thing, because that goes right into the Run Home Tiger number. And obviously, while he's doing his whole thing that's not quite as energetic as I remember it being in the show that I saw, and it's, once again, they're trying to do stuff with the backgrounds here. They're in a milk bar, and it's like, this movie's actually so bizarre I wouldn't put it past them to have Alex DeLarge and the Droogs in here somewhere. They'd almost be fitting. During this number, they keep interrupting it so that Rebel Wilson can have Rebel Wilson-esque lines, like commentary. So there's that. It's like, if that's gonna like kill the momentum of the number, they don't care. So there's that. And talking about other lines, yes, we are pummeled with cat puns. Somebody says, "Look what the cat dragged in." Somebody says, "Cat got your tongue," etc. And then it kind of gets to the point, and I hope I'm not pissing off too many hardcore fans with this, but it does eventually get to the way I pretty much remember feeling about the show, and that is, for a while it's just, hey, this cat has this name and does this thing and has this number, and then this cat and the same, and so on, for like every single fucking one of them. And then after everybody's pretty much been introduced, it just kind of becomes this blurry sort of everybody's dancing, like you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know what anybody's doing, you don't just generally know what the fuck is going on. It's just a whole lot of the cats dancing. I'm sure the show had much more of a a story it was telling through the dance, but I wasn't getting that vibe here. It just felt like a lot of moving around. It's a lot of blurry CGI figures going on. I don't even know. And that's about it. And then it eventually finds its way to an end after trying to turn Macavity. And there's the Growl Tiger character. I think his name is Ray Winstone. Ray Winstone is like the only one. I don't know if it's because I usually picture Ray Winstone with a beard in most of his movies. Ray Winstone's like probably the only one that doesn't look like complete shit as a cat. It almost kind of suits him. But everybody else, yeah. And then they throw in like a climax here, because it's a movie, I guess. And that's about it. So, and then eventually we get to the big moment. And regardless of how you feel about this movie, and regardless of how you feel about the show in general, I think it's kind of hard to argue that Memory is probably one of the best songs to ever come out of a musical, ever. And so this is Tom Hooper, obviously, also directed The Les Mis from 2012, where Anne Hathaway had her big I Dreamed a Dream number and won her Oscar and all that. And that was going to be... He's basically doing the same thing for Jennifer Hudson here and getting her to do the Memory number, which, like the number in Les Mis, is like the big show-stopping one. Only this one is like... This one has the benefit that it's pretty much the finale. So it's what you leave with, which might help a little bit. It's like if it's good enough, maybe they can forget everything else they saw before it. And yeah, it's exactly what you would imagine Jennifer Hudson singing Memory would sound like. Which is amazing, but it's within the context of this movie, so it can only take you so far, but yeah. So I think that's all I can really say about it. It's just fucking weird. It's just really, really fucking weird, and that's about the best I can do. So like I've used all my fucking energy on those two, and I still got 4 more to do. So these might be a little shorter, and more to the point. So we're gonna go into Bombshell. So Bombshell is the movie that is now being released in award season, of course, and did very well at SAG and the Golden Globes as well. Where we have Charlize playing Megyn Kelly and Nicole Kidman playing Gretchen. This would probably be a really good time to tell you as well that I am not entirely familiar with the real people in this movie. I'm aware of those stories when they happened, and I know I've seen these people in actuality. I remember when I saw the makeup on Charlize, it like blew my fucking mind. And there were a lot of people who were like, when those pictures were out, people had assumed that news outlets were accidentally putting out real pictures of Megyn Kelly, and it's like, no, that is Charlize in makeup, believe it or not. And I believe it's the same makeup artist that did Darkest Hour, which makes perfect sense. So they're obviously geniuses. You can add that to Lithgow also. And the thing here is, there's also a character, like Bill O'Reilly is in the movie. We see like, you know, footage of him, but then we also see him like in the movie. And it was like, once again, he's not somebody I've entirely paid attention to, but I know he's the things that have happened. So it's like, it was weird to me. It's like, did they get him in this movie? Like, actually, he seems to be sitting in the room with the actors that I know are actors. And I had to look it up, and it's like, no, that's just a very convincing actor. And there's a few of those cases around here also. Spencer Garrett, I think is his name, who was the interviewer at the beginning of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, plays Sean Hannity for like a split second. And that's perfect also. So it's like, I'm not very familiar with this at all, because I wouldn't be caught dead watching Fox News for any reason. But I had seen them around enough to where it was able to click. That I had seen them before, and like somewhat who was who exactly. Carlson, Gretchen Carlson, that's her name, isn't it? Yes, I think so. And then Margot Robbie is like a composite character. That's basically like a symbol character of like any, you know, young ambitious woman that could walk into Fox News, and this would be the story. So it's directed by Jay Roach, who has been doing these types of movies for a while. He was known for a while as the director of the Austin Powers movies and Meet the Parents. But then he started doing the political TV movies like Recount and Game Change and all that, and showed this totally different side. And so I think this is I want to say this is the first one that he's done that's gotten like a major theatrical release as far as his political movies go. And of course, Charles Randolph, I believe his name, was the Adam McKay's co-writer on The Big Short. So you go into this kind of immediately thinking, okay, so we're getting another Big Short type movie, which, when you look at it, is like, we do have the fourth wall breaking, and the fourth wall breaking, like, switches back and forth between, like, Charlize and Kidman and all that. And it does, like, it's not, like, necessarily as fast, but it's, like the pacing is sort of way off compared to those other movies, but it is, like, I feel like there's so many movies we've compared to, like, The Big Short and The Wolf of Wall Street recently in their style, to the point that style is becoming very tired very fast. But the thing is because of that, I don't know whether to compliment the movie or criticize the movie that it doesn't seem to want to commit to that. Because it's like it does it for like a little bit and at the start, and then it just kind of doesn't. And then like it'll just come back periodically. And it's like they couldn't decide if they really wanted to do that style or not. I would say that probably, much as like I said, the style is way overdone at this point, that still probably falls into the criticism category, because you gotta at least look like you know what the fuck you want to say and how you want to say it. I mean, it's very, very clear what they want to say, but how they seem to want to go about it. Especially since, I mean, there was, like, when you talk about another Adam McKay movie with Vice, where Vice begins with that disclaimer where they take a comedic approach to it, where they say, like, you know, he did say all this stuff, and we did our fucking best, to actually quote the movie. Whereas this one actually starts with, like, a serious disclaimer, where it's like, you know, the people and events and all that. And it does also this thing where it introduces the characters with, like, real pictures. So it's not really that interested right away in being, like, trying to pull you into the world of the actors being totally convincing, because it's like they show you John Lithgow playing Roger Ailes, and then they immediately introduce him by showing real pictures of him. So I don't think they're really going for that whole immersive thing. It's more of the just telling the story in general thing, where they're kind of trying to mix real life and the movie, especially with cutting back and forth between the movie and archive footage, and sometimes you can't really tell which is which all the time. Which, as far as editing goes, is really well done. But sometimes it can also leave stuff up for debate. Like, there is, I've heard a criticism early on that despite how scathing the movie is and seems to want to be, a lot of people had a problem with it seeming to glorify Megyn Kelly and kind of make her, like, the fact that they make her the protagonist, when there's, yeah, like, some people think it's, like, too easy on her, I guess. Like I said, I don't know enough to know exactly, I don't know. But there's, to talk about that, there is another moment at the beginning where they're introducing Roger Ailes, and the way they do this is they start off giving us, like, his backstory, where they say that they talk about, you know, what a monster he is and all that and all the stuff he did, but then it was like, but he had, like, a fucked up childhood, and he had, like, abandonment issues and all that, and it gives you, like, a whole setup to him, as if it's laying right out, we're gonna portray him, you know, as the monster that he allegedly was, but then there's also the thing that says, like, we want to also establish that it seems like he was made that way and not born that way. So it's like, so there's, it doesn't necessarily, they're by no means, like, when you watch the movie, they're by no means wanting you to sympathize with many people, but it seems that they're trying to be empathetic in a way, the way they introduce him like that. But then again, you could also criticize and say that is pretty contradictory to the rest of the movie, that is, like, just scathing to its core. Where it's like, it sets you up to say, hey, it could be because of this that he's that way, and then it's goes in the direction that it goes. So, yeah, and then as far as performances go, obviously the thing about Charlize is we've had cases of this with a lot of actors. Most recent cases would be like Steve Carell in Foxcatcher or Johnny Depp in Black Mass, where it's like, is it the performance that's really good, like genuinely good, or is the makeup doing a lot of the work? And much like the case of Carell and Depp in those movies, I do think Charlize also is like really coming through in a big way. That's not just like the performance is coming through. The makeup just sort of happens to be there and doing its own job really well. But her performance is also just as effective, and it's particularly emotionally. And when she has like the, because you would think, you imagine it'd be hard to do a lot of subtleties when you're covered in makeup, but all three of those actors I mentioned find a way for sure. Especially like in the eyes, they really are able to use that a lot. Lithgow isn't so downplayed as you can probably imagine. He does get to be very sort of. He's a very shouty character. It's a very, very showy part, especially in comparison to what Charlize is given to do. But it's still like nobody can do that like him. So there is that, and that's another one where it's like that's definitely a case where it couldn't be argued that the makeup's doing the acting for him by any means. He is really breaking through that makeup once again, despite as effective as it is by itself. And then you've got Margot Robbie as, like I was saying, the character that's kind of the symbolic character. And at first it was like I wasn't sure because she's been getting, like Golden Globe and SAG nominations and all that. And I was starting to wonder if maybe it was on name basis, because it was like she was just kind of there. But then she gets two big scenes, like two really big scenes. One of them is like a big emotional scene. One of them is like really, really internal. And both are equally effective. There's the first one being the moment where she's harassed by him for the first time. And they do an amazing job of making this scene as like uncomfortable as possible. I've heard some complaints that some people think the movie's a little too safe in the way that shows this stuff, and it's like how they almost seem to intentionally be like watering it down a little bit, and how they could have gone more into it. But they do a lot by not doing too much, where he just asks her to he supposedly wants to see her legs, but he keeps telling her to slowly lift her dress until more is showing. And this scene has like no music, hardly any words whatsoever. Him saying a little farther up is the only dialogue in the scene once it gets going. And it is just so incredibly like unsettling and uncomfortable, and is perfectly done. There's a couple of scenes that are really well done in regards to their lack of words. There's also the scene in the elevator, which I believe was just that scene by itself was the teaser trailer for the movie, which sounds perfect to me. But then Robbie gets another big scene later that I don't want to go too much into the details, but it's the most powerful scene in the movie, and really hits like all the points home that the movie's going for in just one scene. And that guaranteed that's the scene that's getting her all the awards love, and I totally buy it. Getting that kind of recognition, so there's that. And then there's a lot of people in the supporting cast. I can imagine some people maybe having an issue with Kate McKinnon being in this. And the only reason I say that, because I'm a huge Kate McKinnon fan, and she is so amazingly talented. But I can see it almost being distracting, the way that this is more or less a very serious movie on this very serious topic. And these are the kind of people that Kate McKinnon plays on Saturday Night Live. And so you can kind of see, you can see where the problem kind of lies there. And there's also a scene between her and Margot Robbie, like around the time they first meet, that seems to not have anything to do with anything and never really comes back in any way. And it just sort of seems like I have no idea why it's there. It's like they have, important dialogue in that scene, but it really feels like that dialogue could have been in any other context that made sense. But it's like the fact that this was never something that was explored again with Robbie's character is just kind of bizarre. So, but there is a certain thing about like the offices that's saying something, that it's saying something about that. But for Robbie's character, it's like so unlike anything else about her in the rest of the movie. So yeah, I do think a lot of it works, but it really feels like there's something missing. Like there's like a particular much like I get where people are coming from when they say, as scathing as it is, it also feels like it's really holding back for some reason. And it's like you kind of keep waiting for like those, like the moment I was talking about with Robbie, the big moment. This movie should be filled with those, and it wouldn't be overkill, I don't think. So it's always like, it's always kind of underwhelming when it seems like it's this thing that's just going to kind of blow up. It's in the title. It's like you're just waiting for something to just really like take off and blow up, but it just kind of stays at the same sort of like, I don't know, it just doesn't really, I don't know, it just feels like it's missing some sort of punch or something. But the writing for the most part is to be commended, and the performances obviously. And with the material that it's going after and the way that it's going after it, it really just feels like it should be more. There should be like more venom in it, I guess. I can't even really tell what's missing from it, but something definitely is. And it just sort of. It could have hit in like a really, really big way, and I think it feels like it does, but it doesn't really to the extent that it could, I don't think. So that's pretty much how I came away from that. Let's go on to a release from like a couple of years ago with Black Christmas. A remake that I had hope for when it was announced. Because it was announced like so suddenly. Like when it was announced, it had pretty much already been made, I think, and nobody knew about it. And the teaser poster was just a black background and a sharp candy cane with blood dripping off of it. And it was like, holy shit, Blumhouse remade Black Christmas. If it's the right kind of Blumhouse, that could be amazing. And it's like they're releasing it on Friday, December 13th. And it's like, this December was a Friday the 13th. What a perfect time to release a Black Christmas remake. And by Blumhouse, no less. But Blumhouse also has some pretty shit movies, like that Truth or Dare movie or whatever that was. And this falls more in line with that kind of thing, I think. This isn't like a Get Out style Black Christmas movie, which would have been amazing. There's so much potential with them doing a Black Christmas movie. But the thing about it is, I keep saying Black Christmas remake, which is pretty not what it is. It's like they keep trying to remake Black Christmas by not remaking Black Christmas. Because I talked about the original movie, Bob Clark's movie, some years back, and the thing that I really stuck on the most was the whole idea that the killer is never revealed. There's never a motive, there's never an identity, there's nothing. They don't find him, nothing. And that is a terrifying and amazing ending to a horror movie. One of the best horror movie endings ever. Ever. And so they remake it in 2006. It's got like Michelle Trachtenberg in it, and I want to say Mary Elizabeth Winstead, but that might not be right. I don't remember. And if I do remember correctly, that movie begins with the killer's backstory. He like cuts people up with like cookie cutters and bakes them or some shit. And so that immediately throws that out the window. But then I think more or less, despite that, it was a pretty much a remake of Black Christmas. I don't know what the hell this movie is. It's, sorority sisters being murdered at Christmas. I guess that's Black Christmas to an extent, but not particularly. And instead of eerie phone calls of like some dude like threatening them and being really vulgar and profane and like he's ready to kill them at any second, he's like angry with their existence, and we don't know why, which is so terrifying. They're getting like DMs now, DMs from an account from the racist, misogynist founder of the school, who has recently had a statue removed because topical. And like a lot of that stuff, I'm not necessarily against the whole putting topical stuff in movies thing. It's when it feels like that's all they've got is when it's a problem. And this is probably one of those. But I had also heard, going back to the whole not revealing the killer's identity thing that the original movie did, this was an interesting case to go into because I was blind. Because obviously I haven't been watching trailers for like the last 5 years. And I kept hearing that the first thing I heard about this movie was apparently the trailer gave away everything. I was gonna go back and I meant to go back and watch it to see, and I forgot to, but because I just didn't care, I guess. But yeah, apparently I was hearing that the trailers like gave everything away, like more so than they usually do, and apparently that's gotten worse since I stopped watching them. So there was that, on top of the fact that apparently it was a gory R-rated movie that at the last minute got cut down to PG-13. And I think it was, I want to say that Slender Man movie did the same thing, where all the deaths in the movie cut away before they happen. Because they were originally in the movie, and then they got cut out to bring the rating down. So there's really no death scenes in the movie. They cut away from everything. Which, in a better executed movie, would be sort of an interesting thing to speak on about horror movies and the reason that they work, because we're always saying it's about the build-up and the suspense. It's not necessarily about the kill itself. So it's like if you were to have like really, really, really suspenseful build-up for like a long time for these kills, and then just when the kill happens it cuts away, that probably wouldn't be a problem, because the scare was there, and the suspense was there. The terror was there. It didn't matter how gorily they were killed, or even the fashion in which they were killed. Like the effect was there, and the only thing you need to know is that the character was murdered. But that's not really the effective thing. The effective thing is what comes before it, and there's something you can do with that. But these movies are not interesting, especially since they obviously filmed the death scenes and just had to take them out. Then you're left with nothing. You're not left with suspense, you're not left with build-up, and you're not left with kills. You're just left with nothing. You're left with occasional stalking that lasts for maybe 30 seconds, then goes in very obvious directions. There are a couple of inspired moments throughout it that I can't necessarily ignore. Where and most of them are like, it looks like they're onto something, but they're not. Where there's one case where the girl is like walking down the sidewalk. It's the first girl that's always going to be the first kill. And a dude appears behind her, and he starts stalking up like right behind her. And the thing that impressed me about this moment was there was no sound, there was no score, there was no like horror movie trope of any kind. It was just just the image of her walking, and then a dude walking up behind her. And it's like, ooh, that's okay. You got something there. You didn't do loud ass noise. You didn't do the loud score or anything like that. That's pretty cool. But of course, it ends up being oh, never mind. He's just a normal dude. He's not a threat. And then it gets pretty basic. But I do like the image. It's very on the nose. But I do think it's kind of a cool image that, you know, she's being murdered on the snow and she makes like a snow angel before she's dragged away. That's a cool image. That's a way to do, you know, an effective kill without trying to. You can do it in a PG-13 way if you absolutely must, and you won't lose anything, because it doesn't have to be a gruesome kill if the scene looks cool, or if it's a nice execution of the execution. But those don't last. Those don't last at all. Most of the time it's just, oh, I'm just hanging out, I'm doing my thing, and it's like, oh, a hooded figure. Cut. And it's like, and there's some cases where maybe they don't even die, but we have no idea who's being murdered and who's not. But and that sounds like it would be more mysterious than it actually is. It is more or less pretty obvious to tell who's being murdered and who might be being saved for later for whatever not so secret reason. It's basically Cary Elwes' job in this movie to just walk around the campus and look guilty. It's like just come off as guilty as possible. Cary Elwes, by the way, speaking in his real accent, which I don't know that I've ever heard in a movie before. I hear it when he's in interviews, but it's kind of jarring to see him actually speaking with his real voice in a movie. A lot of people are probably going to think he's putting on a really terrible accent, but I'm pretty sure that's his actual accent. So there you go. And like every now and then there is another inspired moment. There is a scene that is a commendable effort where it seems like they're trying to recreate the big jump scare in The Exorcist 3 that I talked about for like 10 minutes alone when I did an Exorcist 3 video. Once again, they basically do it without all the build-up, but you can tell it's sort of the same idea. The jump scare in The Exorcist 3 is another great example of it's all build-up for a kill we don't see. You can do it, guys. It's there. And it's clear you took the approach. You literally basically lifted the way the scene is shot, but you couldn't make anything effective out of it because you're in too big of a damn hurry. And then eventually... And it has some interesting setups. Like, I do like that little musical number where they call out all the douchebag rapists. Is a good scene, and it's like it kind of sets them up as like, you know, good, strong characters. But then you take these, you know, supposedly good and strong characters that you build up, and then you just put them through all the lame-ass horror movie tropes, and you eventually would get to the security guy, where it's like, hey, our friends are disappearing, and instead of him saying, like, okay, what's the story here? Is there anything mysterious been going on? Has there been any trouble, it seems? Or have they been fighting with anybody? No, he just straight up says, oh, it's winter break! People are gone! It's like, yeah, well, you'd think their fucking group of friends would know that, but no, this guy's gonna be dumbass horror movie cop guy and stall the plot so we can do more cliche shit until we get to the ending. Which, I suppose, I don't want to be a dick and just give it all away. Apparently the trailers did that for me, but the idea of it's one thing to have this masterpiece of an ending from the 70s movie when you don't reveal the killer, you don't reveal a motive, you don't reveal anything at all. And then you have a 2006 remake where it's like, oh, this is the killer, and this is why he's crazy. This is the crazy shit he did, and now he's on the loose. It's like, alright, whatever. But then you get to this one, and it's, without saying too much, it's supernatural. It's supernatural in probably the stupidest possible way. So, hooray. Great. Wonderful. And I've been saying for so long now, I would love to see a comeback with the slasher movie. And it's like, we've done the ghost thing, we've done the zombie thing, we've even done the vampires thing has been done to death. It's like, just bring back the dude with the knife. Those movies are always entertaining in some form because of their simplicity. And, like I said, it's one thing. It's one thing alone that it's supernatural. But it's the fucking way that it's supernatural. This is just dumb as hell. But, there it is. I suppose if you go in expecting a slasher movie, you could say that's an unexpected surprise of sorts. But, no, the whole thing surrounding it is pretty lame, ultimately making the movie such. Despite how much, like, every now and then they just kept throwing in bursts of promise. Like I said, I was all for it when I heard about its existence. And it's like, but I don't know what the hell. I don't know why it's called Black Christmas, by the way. I don't know. So, so there that is. It could have been a lot worse. It was built up to me being like really, really, like that's the reason I didn't see it when it came out, was it was built up to be so incredibly terrible. It's not like that. Like, it's not terrible like that. It's bad, for sure. Like, there's no doubt. But it's not the worst thing in the world. There are much worse horror movies that have come out this year. There's much worse horror movies that have come out in probably the past few months even. So that's another thing that's kind of been blown out of proportion, probably. Unlike Cats. But, yeah. So let's go on to The Two Popes real quick. Another movie that had a pretty surprisingly massive showing at the Golden Globes. They really, really love this thing. And I had heard some really interesting things about it going in. Obviously, the main two characters are Jonathan Pryce and Anthony Hopkins. And most of the movie is just the two of them interacting by themselves. and it's like perfect. Like that is a perfect setup because Jonathan Pryce is incredible. In everything, big or small. I even loved him in that second G.I. Joe movie. Of all things, he's like genuinely good in. And it's everything from Brazil, just so many great stuff. Just recently with The Wife, just everything he does. He was a decent Bond villain in Tomorrow Never Dies. A lot of great stuff. And then you've got Anthony Hopkins, obviously, who's both of them got nominated at the Globes also, which is deserved. I do think Price has the showier part. But Hopkins has that real sly way about a lot of his performances that really comes through, and they just bounce off each other throughout the whole movie so well, to the point that I kind of wish that was the whole movie, and I think that's where this movie kind of falls just a little short for me. Is where I really wish just kind of the whole thing was just sort of like a chamber piece thing, but there are flashbacks involved, so there's that. But another thing that really stood out to me that was very interesting was talking about the screenplay adaptation. Because I'm not entirely sure the facts on this, but what I heard was the guy wrote a nonfiction book about this story, and then when he adapted it, he created a fictional screenplay. Like, he wrote the nonfiction book, and then he fictionalized his own book for the screenplay, which is very interesting. And so that's basically all the movie is. Those are the real strengths, are just the two of them together. And I had heard going in that was like, for other people that may not be as excited about a movie that would just be Jonathan Pryce and Anthony Hopkins just talking, one being a current pope and one being a future pope, and I had heard there was like an energy about it. And one of the things that stood out to me was when they were cutting down the short lists for Oscar nominations, and they had said that the two popes was one of the movies disqualified for original score because of pre-existing music in it. And they said specifically the pre-existing music used throughout the two popes is ABBA and the Beatles. And I even, after I heard that, I told my brother, okay, what the hell is this movie? I am so incredibly intrigued. And this was after its showing at the Golden Globes. So, so there's like one of the opening scenes, like one of the first times they're together, they're washing their hands, and Jonathan Pryce is just humming Dancing Queen. And Anthony Hopkins asks him, what hymn is that? And it's like just little lines like that add like a comedic touch to it. Like, it's mostly, I would say it's probably mostly dramatic, especially when it gets into the flashbacks. But there's plenty of those little comedic touches, and just like the soundtrack choices, and there's the editing is like a real standout also, where like it makes the movie really energetic despite what it is at its core. That really makes it stand out. There's a really great scene involving, it's like, it would be like a comedic scene out of any like comedy movie, where they've sat down for pizza, and he asks Hopkins if he wants to say grace, and Hopkins kind of starts to say a prayer, and then every time Jonathan Pryce goes to take a bite, Hopkins continues, and he has to keep putting it back down. It's like, that's a scene out of like any comedy movie, and it's in this, and yet it's appropriate. It fits the tone perfectly, and what's going on between the two characters perfectly also. And sort of like, it's also just kind of sort of almost feels like an acceptance thing, like a tolerance thing, because they come from like two different places politically, and it's like as it goes on and the more they talk, the more common ground they find, and the more they're willing to like compromise and sort of see what the other one's all about. And that's the most interesting aspect of the movie to me. But we do get a lot of the flashback stuff also. In particular, there's one interesting way in which they do it, where the first flashback is about a 5-minute scene, and it's in black and white, and then just as it's transitioning back to them, as the flashback is ending, the black and white flashback fades into color, like at the last minute. And visual stuff like that, would be like a really cool way to handle that, but then the rest of the flashbacks are just normal flashbacks. There's nothing particularly artfully done to them. They're just there. And they do add, a lot to the Jonathan Pryce's character and his background and where he's coming from and why he feels the way he does about his position, and in in a sense, Hawkins' position also. Um, and I said it's really just kind of a back and forth of understanding them. And then when Hawkins seems almost like too sort of, uptight and conservative, it turns out that one of his favorite activities of the day is watching a TV show every week where a dog solves crimes. And they bond over that. And it's, yeah, and just moments like that that just really bring out the human side of the characters and their back and forth and their understanding of each other. Where sometimes they're at odds and sometimes you can see them sort of giving into the other, and it's just a really interesting back and forth through the whole movie. But like I was saying, it's those flashbacks that kind of do. I mean, the flashbacks are effective, in their own way, obviously, and there's a lot of like harrowing, scenes in those scenes, but. I still, just at the end of the day, I kind of just would probably have wanted a movie that's just the two of them that doesn't really cut away to anything else. And it would have made a great chamber piece that could have made a 2 hour and 5 minute movie into, a nice 90-minute chamber thing, with two great actors just going back and forth. So it's like I kind of kept waiting to get really, really swept up in it. And that moment just didn't really come, really, and it's like, so it's well made and it's well shot and it's got their two great performances, so it's like it checks all the boxes, but it's almost like sort of like we were talking about with like Bombshell. It's like it almost checks the boxes a little too closely. Like you almost want them to like step out and do just like one more thing that kind of helps it take off a little bit. But yeah, it's still easily one of the best movies I saw this week for sure. So there's that. And also another thing I forgot to mention about like the use of like soundtrack over like score is there's another really great moment towards the beginning where instead of using a score, it's the sound of bugs in the background. Those bugs that like make that high pitched sound, and like it just grows and grows as their like tension's growing in the scene, and stuff like that really works when they take creative approaches like that to material that seems like it'd be pretty simple otherwise. And so that's, like I said, doing more creative stuff like that with the more downplayed scenario would have probably made me take to it a little more. But I said the flashbacks work in their own right, but I was much more fond of the other stuff. So yeah, so let's end quickly on Togo, because there's not really a whole lot to say about Togo. Togo is the new movie with Willem Dafoe that Disney Plus put out, where it's the sled dog movie, where it's about the dog that got overshadowed by Balto, basically. Where it's like anytime you go back to that animated movie, which I haven't done since I was like 6, it's a movie that always bored me anyway. They even call out the statue in Central Park that they show in that movie so prominently. That's like that should be Togo's statue. And it really does feel like a classic Disney movie. Like I was immediately thinking like Iron Will and White Fang and all those, and then sure enough, when Togo ended, they were like, we also recommend Iron Will and White Fang. It's like, of course you do. They go perfectly together. And yeah, this could have easily been like a classic Disney movie in the 90s. It would have had the same effect as those other ones. And it's so interesting to me, especially in the year of like The Lighthouse, just continuing to show us. I mean, he's always shown us this, but I mean, really in particular, especially when you look at these two back to back, that Willem Dafoe is just he's so capable of making himself at home in any role, in like any context. It's like whether you're in something like The Lighthouse and that performance, or whether you're in a Disney movie about sled dogs, he's just so perfect. Especially when you see the real picture of the dude, it's like it's perfect casting. And what's really interesting about this movie is the approach that it takes, where it could just be, the standard sort of like, it's weird to say there's a standard sled dog movie, but there is at this point. It's cutting back and forth between this is when flashbacks do work in the movie's favor, much more so, when it's where we see the connection between him and Togo, and there's definitely something there that's established just by their presence with each other, but then the movie is continuously cutting back and forth between what they're doing then and back when he was like just a puppy and they were taking care of him and he was like doing mischievous puppy things that you see in a classic Disney movie. And there's also the relationship between him and Togo is the thing here, but There's also like a separate connection between Togo and Julianne Nicholson playing Defoe's wife, and there's like he's both of their dog, but he has like it feels like he has such a different connection with both of them, and both of them are like incredibly heartfelt, especially in the later scenes when it's like it'll really like get to dog lovers like myself when Defoe has these narration moments talking about his connection, like in depth detail of the connection that he and Togo have, and it's really like the ending of the movie in particular is like extremely touching without going too into like overly sentimental kind of stuff. Like this movie almost avoids sentimentality like entirely, like the kind that's too much. Like it's there just enough and doesn't feel too manipulative or anything like that. It's very straightforward about itself and what it is, and that's for the better. Like they don't try to make anything too outlandish or showy. There's quite a few action scenes in it, like of them going over ice that's cracking and stuff like that, and jumps like will they make it or will they not and all that. But nothing that's too like overblown or actiony. Like it all feels so incredibly grounded. And I think a lot of that also has to do with how incredibly well shot it is. Like it's so weird to me that like the first Disney Plus movies are Noelle, the Lady and the Tramp remake, and this. Because Noelle and Lady and the Tramp look like shit. They look like they were made for $10 combined. And Togo feels like so big and so cinematic, and the scenery is incredible. And it's like so... The whole movie's just so well made. And it's... Yeah, so... Like I said, that's really all there is to it. Like, there's really nothing else I can really elaborate on. Apart from that, and I think that really says enough about it. Like it's that simple, but it works so well. Like I said, especially if anything involving like dogs gets you like in just the right places. I will say, on the Nature of Daylight, like I think Max Richter composed is a music score you've probably heard a lot. It's in like it's in Arrival, it's in Shutter Island, it's in Disconnect. I think it's in commercials. It's used for the climax of this movie also, and like I said, a very, very touching ending, but I do think that piece can be retired for a little bit before it's too overused and loses its impact. As impossible as that seems, we can probably settle on that, but still, very effective use for a very effective ending in a very effective and simple movie. So that's about it for that. So I think that's going to be it for this. Oh my god, we made it through. Okay. So, I'm going to do 4 more of the Christmas videos. 2 of those will be with my brother, which I'm psyched about. And then the post-Christmas video is going to be Uncut Gems, Little Women, and The Aeronauts. And whatever else there potentially might be, I'm really not sure. So... yeah, and I'd like to throw in one more verses before the year's over too, and I know which one that one's going to be, so we'll see if that happens also. So, and then our next awards video is tomorrow, assuming this gets out Friday, even though it's 10 after 11. So yeah, so until all that stuff, I think that's going to be it for this.